Hi folks. We are now about to start our next unit on the basics of light, and we are really going to move beyond just how to control your camera and do some basic editing and start looking at what makes a photo actually good. So one of the major aspects of that is light. And let's take a look at what you're going to learn. You're going to learn the difference between soft and hard light and how to create either one whenever you want to, as well as the directional aspects of light. So front light, back light, side light, flat light. Those really are the main things that we're going to focus on. How to achieve them and what they do to your pictures when you're using them. So here's what you're going to make when you work on this assignment. You're going to make a portfolio of images. So there's there should be 11 images total. First one should be soft light in any direction. Second one is hard light in any direction. And then we're going to switch from showing me you can do soft light and hard light to show me different directions. So side light from any quality, either hard or soft. Then front light from any quality, either hard or soft. It's up to you. Backlight, flat light, which is basically non-directional, and we'll look at that in a second. And then the final part is 5 images of the exact same location at 5 different times a day, specifically. So at sunrise, 1 hour after sunrise, midday, 1 hour before sunset, and then sunset itself. And you're going to be pointing the camera in the exact same direction for each of those pictures so they look exactly the same or 98% the same. But because it's a different time of day, the sun's going to be coming from a different angle and it's going to have different quality and all this fun stuff. So that's what we're going to build. Let's take a look at some of these definitions so we can get a sense of how it all works. So first off, soft versus hard light. What makes light hard or soft? It's not about brightness. Brightness is just the intensity of the light, and you can have very bright soft light and very dim hard light. It's really either way. Works fine. But if you look at these two flashes here, you'll see that one is a fairly small little guy and one is a very large modifier. The large modifier creates soft light and the small modifier creates hard light, because the larger the light source seems relative to its subject, the softer the light is. And what does that even mean? What is soft light? Soft light is more diffused, and it will spread around a subject more, and the line between light and shadow will be faded, like a gradient. If you can see this picture here of sunrise in Southwest Harbor, the shadows are very smooth where it switches from light to shadow. It's hard to say exactly. You can see where a shadow is and you can see where a light is, but you can't see exactly where one starts and the other one stops. That's soft light. And it's because the light is shining through a cloud, which then becomes the light source, which is very large relative to what we're dealing with. So yeah, those are great big lights. Great big light gives you nice soft, flattering shadows, very easy to work with. Little teeny light gives you very hard shadows, a little bit more dramatic kind of feel to it. Neither one's right or wrong, it just depends on what you're looking for. So if you look at these are another couple of good examples of soft versus hard light. The first one here on the left, that's soft light. If you look at the shadows under her chin and to the left of her nose, or it's the right, I guess, on the screen, but I keep flipping in my head, you can see that they fade like a gradient. But if you look at the other one where I shot with a little teeny light, then you got clear outlines. Look at that nose shadow right there. It's all very clear. It's like lit, and then boom, there's where the shadow hits. And same thing, you've got a very clear line under here where the light's hitting. The light's coming from the same direction. It's the same basic power, same exposure settings. It's just one is using the great big box, that's the soft light, and one's using the little teeny dish, and that's the hard light. And you can see smooth transitions, hard transitions. Flat light is where you got so much cloud or you're in a complete shadow that there basically is no light direction. There's no direction, no quality to it. If you shoot something that's all in the shadow, that's going to be flat light because there's no difference. So you just increase your exposure and then you've got nice, soft, even lighting. You can't screw up a picture that's in flat light because everything's lit. It might be boring. Sometimes it is, but flat light is very easy to shoot in. This one's front light right here. You can see the light is shining on, hitting the subject from the front. So remember that. It's not about where you are as a photographer, it's about where the light is hitting the subject. If the light is hitting your subject from the front, which means it's coming from behind the camera, that's front light. If it's coming from behind the subject and coming into the into the camera because it's behind the subject that's backlight. So this is front light. You can see the little shadow on her nose coming mostly straight down and under her chin there because the light's shining straight in her face. Side light is really fun. You can see on this model's picture, the left side is lit up, the right side is in shadow because the light's coming right from the side and going across. And then in this early morning picture from Seawall in Southwest Harbor, the sun is coming not exactly straight from the side, but mostly from the side. And it creates lots of nice, it brings out all the texture in the rocks and gives you lots of fun shadows to kind of play with. Backlight is really fun because it's so flexible. You can do a silhouette like this picture here of my wife and I on an early, yeah, it's us. So yeah, when we were young and carefree. And by exposing for the light hitting the water, what you get is the light becomes its own color, and then everything in between the camera and the light then becomes a nice dark shadow, and you get the outlines and stuff. That's fun. Or you can do like this one that where I exposed for the shadows, so I brighten up the whole picture, let the background kind of wash itself out, and then what you have is flat light on her face, but then highlights going around her hair. And then sort of in between the two is this one of the grass here, and you can see how it lights everything up, and the dust that's floating in the air and the pollen and stuff all lights up. It looks like a magical fairyscape. So I really like to play with backlight. If I'm shooting portraits, I'm almost always using flat light or backlight. Those are the basic kinds of light that we have. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to take you out in the field for a little bit and show you how to work with those different kinds of light, and a little bit more in terms of how to identify them as we come across them. Stick around, let's take a look.
Let's talk a little bit about how to find soft light and hard light. Right now I'm in my classroom and I'm using window light to light my own face. And it's pretty directional, as you can see, because this side is quite a bit darker than this side. But it also should be pretty soft because of where I'm located. So the window's right here, shining. There's no direct sunlight hitting the window, it's all reflected light. And then that reflected light is kind of feathering off, getting even more diffuse coming this way into my face. So this is using that same window, just straight onto my face, which really isn't too bad right now because it's definitely all just reflected light. If there was direct light shining through it, like if you could see the sun out that window, and there was beams of light coming through, that would be probably too harsh to shoot. But this is still pretty soft light. You can see the way it kind of falls off because with reflected light, the farther it has to go, the less light you get. So it's darker behind me than it is in front of me. If you're looking for hard light, use a light bulb. Those are small and they're going to give you very strong, clear shadows. A lot of times we're talking about lights in the ceiling, and I'm not a huge fan of that because it's top light, which then, I don't know, it's hard and the direction's not super flattering. I don't really like it most of the time. But it's something to experiment with as well. Here I've got just a couple of regular fluorescent bulbs hitting me. So they're fairly small and fairly strong, and they give me that kind of harder light. When you're thinking about light, try not to use mixed light. What I mean by that is I've turned off all the lights in my classroom right now. I'm just illuminated by this window. And that means that the color of the light and the direction of the light is much more controlled. If you've got the window open and you've got ceiling lights that might be different colors, all that's going to mess with your picture a little bit. So try to avoid that if you possibly can. Okay, we're talking about flat light now. So I'm showing you an example of flat light. I'm standing in a shadow. That means that any light that's in here is reflected off the ground and all around, and means it has no direction. You can't see me very well right now because I've exposed for all the light, which includes the sky. If we come in and make the shadow our light and just increase our exposure, then we get very even, flat light, which can be lovely for portraits and all kinds of things where you don't want a lot of shadows. Now here I am back in the same shadow, slightly different angle, but we're filling the camera with all the shadowed area here. And you can see it's a nice, soft, even light. Wherever I am, I'm pretty well lit. There's not a whole lot of direction to it. There's a tiny bit because you can see there's more of the light reflected kind of coming at me from the side. So I should get a little bit of shaping light there in some of the shadows. Mirror image over there. But for the most part, it's pretty soft, pretty flat. Now this last one is front lighting, or axis lighting, you could also call it that. It's very simple. it's the one that my dad always taught me to do first when I was first learning the camera, because you're always going to know that you're getting hit by light. The sun is directly going right into my face. You can see shadows on my face that way, like probably from my nose and stuff. I can't really see right now, but it should be there. So when in doubt, you can always put the sun right behind your camera and face it right into the person. There are some drawbacks to front lighting, particularly with portraits. Right now I'm a little bit blind because the sun's right in my face. It's blocked by a little bit of cloud, but it's still pretty bright. Now we've got a pretty good example of side lighting. I've just brought the camera around a little bit and stuck it in the road. The sun is over there, shining down on me from the side, and you can see that part of me is lit. This side should be lit pretty well, and this side should be mostly in shadows. And you can also see that along those hills over there, the way that the hills get the shapes, and from the shadows they bring out that texture and the three-dimensionality a little bit better. If it was just flat light, those grassy rolly hills might just kind of blend in a little bit. But with the sun hitting it from the side, that brings out that sense of texture and that sense of shape a little bit better. This is backlighting. The sun is directly behind my shoulder right over there, and it's shining down on me as a subject. So let's assume that you're the cameraman or camera person. You're the camera person standing behind the camera. When you're backlighting, you have the light behind the person you're shooting, and it's shining right into the camera. Backlighting is fun because it's very versatile. You can expose for the subject, which we're doing basically right now, where the sky is overexposed and the sun is overexposed, but we're getting decent detail in the shadow area, which is me, because the light is hitting me from behind. But we can also do a silhouette, where you expose for the light itself, and then the subject is just a black, kind of a dark shape. So let's take a look at what that also looks like. And that's me silhouetted by the sky. And you can see the outline of my shape and all that, and it's very clear. You know, if I turn sideways, I've got my profile, and which is, you know, that's what we can do with backlighting. So backlighting is fun. It gives you a lot of possibilities. You can do some very kind of romantic Gone with the Windy kind of stuff, or you can do more what we did in the earlier shot, where you see the highlights kind of lighting up around the edges of something.
I think it's important for this that you choose a location that you can easily get to throughout the course of one day. So that might not be the best photos you can possibly get, but for this exercise, it's really important to see how things change as the light changes. So if you pick someplace you can't get to, you're not going to do it. That's why I'm going to shoot right in the street in front of my house, because I can get there and not struggle. So make sure you choose wisely when you pick your first shot, because you're going to be there for a couple of minutes at a time all day today. All right, let's try it. Morning, everybody. It is now a little bit after sunrise, just a few minutes, and I'm going to try and get my first shot for my light portfolio straight down my street with the sunrise shot. I'm using a wide-angle lens. Let's try and see what we can get for our composition here. So because I'm on a tripod, I really don't need to worry about my shutter speed. I might set a 2-second timer so that I can get my hands off the camera when I take the picture. I'm just gonna focus a little ways down the street, slow my shutter speed, watching the histogram, exposing to the right. I don't want to overexpose any of the sky since I'm getting a decent amount of sky in the shot. Focus, take my hands away, get my shot. Then I'm just checking the image right now to make sure that everything is in focus, all the way from the background down to the foreground. Because this kind of storytelling picture, I really want everything to be there. I'm not sure I love this composition. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit more, because I got a lot of just street here that I don't really care about. And I'm gonna tilt it up a little bit to get a little bit more sky, so that we got that cool morning light. Let's use it. Try it again. The light meter says I'm almost a stop underexposed, but that's because it's looking at all the shadow detail. Really what I want to make sure is that I don't overexpose the sky. So that's why you use a combination of the light meter and the histogram. That looks pretty good. I've got one little flashy looking at my picture right in that center bit of sky there. So I'm going to do one more. Let's speed that up a whole stop.
and then take the shot and see what that comes out. Now I look at it, I've got no flashies. Flashies, if you haven't looked at that before, when you're playing back your images, you can turn it on so it flashes places where you've clipped your highlights, meaning that you've overexposed to the point where the highlights aren't being shown anymore. I know that I can recover a lot of shadows, so I'm going to expose for that. And that one looks pretty good. So I'm going to come back in an hour and shoot this exact same scene with whatever light I have in an hour. It's kind of cloudy today, so I'm not 100% sure this experiment is going to work. If it's totally cloudy, the light changes are going to be pretty subtle, but that'll be an experiment in itself. The last thing I'm going to do before I go is find some ways to mark where my tripod goes. If this were somewhere where I could just leave the tripod, that would be ideal. But I can't because I'm in the middle of the street. So I'm going to there's some fallen branches over here, and I'm going to make little marks where my tripod feet go. I probably won't get the exact same composition doing this, but it'll be pretty close. And I really want to make sure that what I'm doing is the same as much as possible, so that all that's really changing is the light and the scene itself, what's going on in the scene. There might be differences in terms of garbage trucks, whatever, but my composition stays the same. All right, we'll come back in an hour. Okay, we are now back for round 2. It's been about an hour since the last shots, and I am hoping that the light's changed a bit. I can see much more direct sunlight coming from over there, and we're gonna have to retake the shot now with new settings because it's brighter and the light's changed. And let's see what comes out. I'm gonna try and bring the camera a little closer so you can see me adjust the settings as I go. Let's try that. All right, so earlier this morning, I was at 1/13 of a second f8 ISO 64. That's obviously not gonna work. I gotta switch my display so I can see my histogram. If you can see that, my shadows are not touching the right. So I'm gonna speed that shutter speed up. And now I got those spikes to the right where the sky is getting lost. And really I go to 1/80th of a second now, and I've got a pretty good exposure. I don't think I need a 2-second timer now at 1/80th of a second. Fire it off, there's 2 pictures. That exposure looks pretty good on the sky. You can see there's much deeper raking shadows. Sharpness looks good all across. I would say that looks like a good solid picture. All right, we're back. And it is now just about 11:30 in the morning. And looking at my Apple Watch, the sun is just about as high as it's gonna get. In about a half an hour, it'll be slightly higher up. In the autumn, the sun is never fully straight up. You're gonna get that more, at least in the northern hemisphere. The further north you get, the more it's at an angle at autumn. In the summer, you'll get it straight up and down, but this is about as straight up and down as we're gonna get. So let's take a look at our settings here. Okay, you know, it's kind of funny. I shot the whole thing with the camera so I could watch myself, and then realized I shot it with the camera in the frame. So let's try that again. We're at 1/80th of a second here. That's now too long. It's leaving the shutter open too long, it's overexposed. So looking at my histogram, I'm gonna bring that up to 1/160th of a second. Then focus my shot, fire one off. And just to be safe, I'm gonna then turn it up to 1/200th of a second. What I mean by being safe is I wanna avoid clipping my highlights. If my shadows are a little too dark, I can always brighten those up. I don't wanna have to fix my highlights because I'll probably fail. So I get those two shots, 1/160th of a second f8 64 and 1/200th of a second f8 ISO 64, and we'll see which one works better. We're back, and it is now a little over an hour before sunset. So we're gonna do the shot again. Last shot was at 1/200th of a second f8. It is definitely too dark now. My brightest parts are right in the middle. So let's drop that shutter speed down to 1/60th of a second, which is kind of interesting because that's kind of where we were before, in the hour after sunrise, right? So we get the sky is still exposed pretty well, and the land is where the sun is hitting is okay, and then the shadows are pretty deep. That is pretty much what we want. Incidentally, this section of the video is the first time I've used my new 40mm f2 lens, which is teeny tiny, and I'm hoping to use it to replace my 35mm 1.8, when I sell that to get a 24 to 120 millimeter landscape lens. So we'll see if there's any difference in video quality. So we are now ready to do the final shot of the project. It is currently about 6:20 and sunset is officially at 6:26. It's gone behind the trees at this point, so the sun is really not hitting anything except for the sky above. So right now I'm at f8, 1/60th of a second, ISO 64. That's what I shot the last picture at. And everything's too dark. If I drop my shutter speed down to, wow, 1/10 of a second though, my exposure looks pretty solid. And actually even 1/8 of a second, I don't think I'm gonna do two, 1/10 and 1/8 of a second, just to make sure that I'm really keeping the detail in the sky. There's a little bit of pink all the way down to the end of the street. So let's do 1/10 and then 1/8. Always check your pictures if you have a second to make sure that they are sharp. That one is sharp. The other one, kind of sharp. I think because I have my focus box in the middle of the street where there wasn't a lot of contrast to grab onto, it didn't really work. So we'll try a 1/10 as well. And then we'll double check that. That looks good. It's sharp far away, sharp close up. And we've got our exposure. Let's take a look at those on the computer and see what they look like. See if we might even be able to decide which one we like best. Well, we've shot our pictures, and I think it's worth taking a quick minute to take a look at them on the computer and see how things change from one image to the next. So if you look over here on my screen, we'll see our 5 pictures in order from right here, which is the first one in the morning at just about sunrise, then an hour after sunrise, and then midday, an hour before sunset, and then sunset itself. Let's zoom in on those. So an interesting thing about sunrise, you need to be somewhere where you can actually see the horizon to get the really dramatic colors. When you're kind of in a valley surrounded by trees, you're mostly going to get shadows, and by the time the light is hitting, it's not as interesting anymore. That's why sunrises are great from mountaintops, from east-facing shoreline where there's a long distance into the horizon. But you can definitely see that this is different than the other ones. It's all deep shadows along here. There's just a little bit of light hitting kind of where the leaves are starting to turn yellow. And in my editing of this picture, I boosted the brightness along here just to sort of even it out a little bit. Or it would be even more dramatic, the differences, but I wanted to see some detail. You got some great garbage cans in the foreground, fun stuff. An hour later, the sun's now higher up on the left side over here in the east, and you can see it's starting to hit some areas of the grass here and getting some lines, and we've got some kind of lines of light coming through. The sky's a little bit more blue, and some people have brought some more garbage out. So the day is progressing along. Now this is when in midday, and things are at the highest contrast. It's kind of not as pretty. You can see clear definition of the trees because the light's shining down this way. The trash cans are now in pretty deep shadow. There's a squirrel over here kind of doing his squirrely thing. And it's not bad, but I think if you look at compared to these colors early in the morning to this, it's just not necessarily as interesting. I like the hour before sunset. It's got a nice balance. So there's more kind of differentiation between the light and the shadows, and we're getting that nice kind of warm glow of late afternoon, early evening. And then actual sunset, just like sunrise, you need to be able to see the horizon to get the fun colors. And so that doesn't really show up here. You just see that mostly like the land is in shadow and there's a little bit of light in the sky still. It's very similar to sunrise. So that's what we have. What works best for you is kind of up to you. If I had to choose one, I don't know. Any of these is kind of fine. So maybe this one here.
And I might zoom in, I might crop it in a little bit to get rid of the garbage cans. I mean, they're a foreground element, but just because something's in the foreground doesn't necessarily make it good. So that's what you'd want to do. You'd want to take your pictures, throw them into your slideshow, your portfolio, so that we get all of the examples of the different kinds of light, and then the 5 pictures from the same location at the same time of day. All right. I look forward to seeing what you come up with.